BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, it's Anna Hill here with the Farming Today podcast. In this episode, national parks in England welcome more autonomy but ask if there's more funding to help it happen. And is the Treasury assessment of how many farms could pay inheritance tax wrong because of HMRC guidance on how farms should be valued?
They have followed official government guidance. A dairy herd may well be on a substantially undervalued basis. A clamp of silage may actually never have been noticed for this purpose because it might not have been there at the balance sheet date. All these are matters that will now come out of the woodwork.
We'll have more on that a little later. First, though, if you've bought your festive holly and it's got a lot of berries, you may be just one of the lucky ones, because according to a farmer in the east of England, berries are few and far between this year. Alex Dunlop from BBC Look East reports.
With Christmas just days away, most of Nick Collar's orchard in Norfolk is decked with boughs of green holly. But this season, something is amiss. After a bumper harvest last year, this season, the berries are taking a break.
I knew this was coming, and I've told most of our customers last year. I said we're going to see a year of very, very few berries.
And what does that mean for business?
Unfortunately, we're not sending any holly this year to London, to the markets. The price has gone up about fourfold, and then retail, you've got to pay about fivefold for it. So it is a very, very expensive product this year. Our takings are going to be about 20% of what they normally are, so it's down quite considerably.
So what's going on? Well, step-up gardening guru Bob Flowerdew, doyen of BBC Gardeners' Question Time. I joined Bob as he pruned his holly tree at his home in Dickleborough. He shows me quite literally a handful of berries.
This is my total crop. That's your lot. That's a lot from the whole tree. I can count 8. I don't think that's going to make much of a Christmas. The trees use all the resources to make the berries, to make the seeds, and so they produce a whole load. Now they're feeling weak. They don't really want to have another baby straight away, so they're taking a year off.
Bob Flowerdew there, ending that report from Alex Dunlop. New government legislation is being proposed to widen the public's access to national parks in England and to restore more protected landscapes. The government says the changes will cut through bureaucracy to achieve more for people and nature. National Parks England Executive Director Jane Butler told me the changes could enable better cooperation to improve things like water quality.
Part of the legislative change that's been brought in is guidance for public bodies to help them understand their obligations to support the work of national park authorities. So that might mean, for example, water companies who have treatment works within a national park. It might be local authorities that have responsibilities and how they should be contributing to the work of the national park.
And although the changes have been welcomed by National Parks England, Jane Butler said funding to meet the ambitions should be made available after declines in grants over the last 15 years.
This year, we have had almost £54 million for national park authorities, but we're being proposed for next year that will be decreased by £5 million, so it'll be about £49 million. And what we're actually asking government to do is to increase that by £5 million rather than decreasing it, so it'll be £59 million that we're given. And that extra money is really intended to drive some additional nature recovery work in national parks, through rangers, for example, to make sure that rights of way are maintained, to make sure that visitors are supported and aware of how to go about spending time and enjoying national parks without causing any impact to the land around them.
Jane Butler from National Parks England. Now, all week in the run-up to Christmas, we're sampling the offerings of rural pubs and inns and hearing what many of them contribute to communities across the country. In Perthshire in Scotland, a pub hotel has an intimate relationship with the fortunes of the river it sits alongside. Nancy Nicholson pulled on her waders to find out more.
So what I'm doing today is just walking along the river, looking for signs of spawning activity. This is a time of year where spawning salmon is very active, so we expect the river type biologists to come along and survey the river and get an idea of how many fish are spawning this year. The fish has been well studied and well researched, but the numbers on the whole are still declining, which is definitely a worry.
Well, I'm with Callum McRoberts, who's the gilly here on the McClure beat on the Tay. And no fishing at the moment because it's the closed season. But who are your clientele normally?
Yeah, so we get people from all over the world. The majority probably coming from England, starting in middle of January, going right through to the middle of October.
What I'm talking about today is the relevance of the fishing to the McClure Arms and the success of that business. Do most of your clients stay there?
They do, aye, because people travel quite a way to come here, and the hotel is very close to the fishing. It's only a mile or so away.
Welcome to the McClure Arms, which is our country pub on the bank of the River Tay. The inn itself has a 12-bedroom. We also have our own butchery, our own farm, so we very much serve a field-to-fork cuisine with a French influence.
I detected that. So Claire Mercer-Nairn, you're the co-owner of the McClure Arms and manager of McClure Fisheries, and we're here in the bar where I've been watching local people in just for a cup of coffee this morning. But underpinning the entire business is the angling. What stretch of river do you have here?
So we have around 2 miles on the Tay. It's called McClure and Upper Isla Mouth. We also have fishing on the River Isla. It's essential. It provides regular business throughout the darkest months of the year. The fishing open on the 15th of January. There's a big ceremony, and people pretty much from all over the world come to our little rural villages to try to catch the iconic Tay salmon. No one will go on holiday in Scotland in March apart from a crazy fisherman.
The salmon stocks are a concern for rivers across the country. How crucial is it that the salmon stocks are healthy for your business here?
So if you think about it, if we lose spring fishing, the spring fishing stock, we will become completely seasonal. You know, we will close during the winter because it will be very, very difficult to maintain a hotel that size and restaurant in the winter. So, yes, we have a symbiotic relationship with the salmon.
And I have to ask, you are French. How do you end up here on the Tay with a business that is dependent on salmon?
L'amour. Indeed. I met my husband when I was working in Singapore, and he mentioned that, you know, his grandfather had this place in Scotland. So he gave up his banking career, and I gave up my semiconductor one, and we found ourselves in a very cold house in Scotland in February with a lot of bill to pay.
Nancy Nicholson reporting there from the River Tay. Now, a bit of a deep dive into the changes to inheritance tax for farmers, because it seems the figures being used by the Treasury to estimate how many farmers will be impacted could be inaccurate because of historical advice given by HMRC, the tax office. That's according to the Central Association of Agricultural Valuers, who we'll hear from in just a moment. Now, as we've reported on this programme, the government has introduced 20% inheritance tax on farm assets worth more than £1 million. Until this change, farmers have been able to claim 100% agricultural property relief, or APR, on land and farmhouses, and 100% business property relief, or BPR, on other assets like machinery and livestock. Farmers say the change will affect as many as 3/4 of them. But the Treasury says data from previous claims for inheritance tax relief suggest just 500 estates a year across the UK will be impacted. One of our listeners, Fred Mullen, got in touch to suggest the discrepancy could, in part, be down to inaccurate Treasury figures. He says, for probate purposes, farms would be valued approximately at a land value per acre, with little or no value being attributed to livestock, feed stores or machinery, which would in any event be subject to 100% tax relief. That means, he explains, that many farms would be valued at £1 or £2 million, when in fact the true value was closer to 4 or 5 million. So, is he right? Here's Jeremy Moody, Secretary and Advisor to the Central Association of Agricultural Valuers.
Yes, Fred Mullen is broadly right. The returns made by people claiming business property relief have, at the instruction of HMRC, been made on the basis of the balance sheet in their annual accounts, which are based on cost, not on the market value that the Inheritance Tax Act actually requires.
So are you saying that farms have historically been undervalued on paper?
For their machinery, their livestock, their silage, other assets and stores, yes. Not for the value of the land, the buildings, the dwellings, because those are almost always properly valued. But a dairy herd may well be on a substantially undervalued basis. A clamp of silage may actually never have been noticed for this purpose because it might not have been there at the balance sheet date. All these are matters that will now come out of the woodwork once we move, if we move, to a partial relief rather than a full relief.
How much difference is there in those valuations then?
I think the obvious and easy example is something like a dairy herd, where if it's been run by the farm for decades, that might have had a historic value of £400 or £500 a cow. That might now be 1,800 or 2,200 were it on market value today.
Just to be clear, has someone been lazy or negligent in not valuing the farm properly?
Well, the taxpayers have done what HMRC has said in its guide to filling in the inheritance tax reform they should do. So they have followed official government guidance. The Act strictly requires market value, but I assume here that HMRC has said this is the pragmatic way to save everybody time and cost and effort in a process where getting probate can take long enough anyway without needing something that doesn't alter the answer because there's been full relief.
So what does that mean then for the number of farms that you think will have to pay inheritance tax?
Well, it's individual owners of farming businesses that will have to pay. So it's not necessarily the business, but we see it, the number being 5 times the number that the Treasury have given out.
You must talk to politicians and maybe civil servants as well. Is there an understanding in the Treasury about the discrepancy here?
Well, we talk about the figures. The Treasury, we think, has simply not been able to get answers to the right questions that would allow a further debate to reconcile these issues.
And what's your answer?
Our answer is 75,000 taxpayers over a 30-year generation are affected by this before you think about inflation.
You brought this to the attention of the government. You mentioned it before the EFRA committee, the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee. Have you had any response privately from members of Parliament, for instance, who you've talked to?
Well, the EFRA committee was interested when I ran through the argument. We do continue to talk with civil servants over the figures. I know all these are attempts to understand what the future would look like were the changes to go through as proposed. The government will obviously cling to its approach until it decides to change its mind.
Jeremy Moody, and we'll be speaking to Jeremy again in the new year. So if you have any questions about the changes to inheritance tax, do send them in. You can email farming.today@bbc.co.uk. Meanwhile, we put these points to the Treasury, but we didn't hear back from them in time. That's all from us. I'm Anna Hill. The producer is Heather Simons. Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.